Hello everyone, and welcome back to Nocturnal Narrative Studio. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could subscribe to my lovely channel and leave a comment letting me know which country you're listening from around the world. So, without further ado, let's begin the story. I didn't expect the cemetery to be where everything finally fell apart, but that's how these things work, I guess. They don't announce themselves. They wait until you're comfortable, until you trust the people beside you, until the ground under your feet feels solid enough to stand on without thinking. I was 19 that summer, old enough to believe I knew people, young enough to be wrong about it. The invitation came from Marcus, my best friend since middle school. He said his uncle was a groundskeeper at a private cemetery on the edge of town, one of those places with wrought iron gates and family mausoleums that look like small churches. The kind of cemetery people only visit during daylight and never alone. Marcus framed it like a harmless adventure. Late night photography, urban exploring, nothing illegal if we stayed respectful. He knew I'd been stuck creatively, struggling to find anything worth shooting for my photography class. I should have noticed how carefully he avoided looking at me when he said it. There were 4 of us total: me, Marcus, his girlfriend Elise, and her cousin Jonah. We piled into Marcus's car just before dusk, the sky already bruising purple. Everyone was in good spirits, joking, passing around gas station snacks, talking about ghosts like they were hypothetical, like they didn't belong to real places with real dirt. The cemetery was older than the town itself. Headstones leaned at odd angles like tired men, names worn smooth by rain and time. Tall trees crowded the fence line, their branches tangling overhead and blocking the last of the sun. Marcus unlocked a side gate with a key he claimed his uncle gave him, and that should have been the first red flag. Not because of the gate, but because of how easily it opened. At first, it felt peaceful. I remember thinking how quiet it was, not silent, but hushed. The air smelled like damp leaves and old stone. Crickets chirped somewhere far off, and the gravel path crunched under our shoes in a way that felt grounding, reassuring. Elise laughed too loud, the sound echoing between headstones. Jonah dared Marcus to lie down on a grave for a photo. Normal, stupid stuff. Looking back, though, the first thing that bothered me wasn't the cemetery at all. It was how Marcus kept checking his phone, even though there was no service. We set up near a row of 19th century graves, ornate carvings and angel statues streaked black with mildew. I took photos while the others wandered, the flash briefly lighting names and dates that ended too young. I felt watched, but that's a cliché, and I told myself that's all it was. Darkness does that to you. I'll skip the boring stuff. Hours of wandering, dozens of photos, Elise pretending not to be scared while gripping Marcus's arm. Somewhere around midnight, we decided to sit and rest near a large family plot enclosed by a low iron fence. That's when I noticed my backpack felt lighter. My spare camera battery was gone. I'd been meticulous. I always was. That battery lived in the front pocket, zipped shut. I asked if anyone had borrowed it. Elise shook her head. Jonah shrugged. Marcus said maybe I dropped it. I believed him, or wanted to. Not long after that, Jonah swore he heard footsteps on gravel. Slow ones. Heavy. We all froze, listening. Nothing followed. Marcus laughed it off, said it was probably a raccoon. Still, he suggested we move deeper into the cemetery, away from the entrance. That didn't make sense to me, but I didn't argue. Things kept disappearing after that. My flashlight. Elise's silver ring, cheap but sentimental. Jonah's lighter. Every time, Marcus brushed it off. "You're tired," he said. "It's dark. This place messes with your head." At one point, a distant bell rang. Just once, low and hollow. I asked Marcus if the cemetery had a bell tower. he said no too quickly. We eventually split up to explore nearby mausoleums, promising to stay within shouting distance. I hated the idea but didn't want to be the coward. I took the path alone, following a narrow trail between crypts that felt more like a hallway than a walkway. That's when I found the notebook. It was tucked behind a cracked marble tomb, wrapped in plastic, weighed down with a stone. At first I thought it was trash. Then I saw my name on the first page. That's when it hit me. Every page was filled with handwriting I recognized immediately. Marcus's. Dates, times, observations, notes about me, about Elise, about Jonah, sketches of graves, symbols I didn't understand, tally marks beside our names. One page listed personal items, battery, ring, lighter, check marks beside each. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might pass out. There were photos tucked into the back, Polaroids. Grainy dark. Us, sleeping at past sleepovers, hanging out at the lake last year, sitting on my porch late at night. Photos I didn't know were taken. Photos taken from outside my bedroom window. I heard footsteps then, real ones, close. I shoved the notebook into my jacket and ran. When I got back to the others, Marcus was furious. Not scared, angry. He demanded to know where I'd been. I showed them the notebook. Elise started crying. Jonah swore under his breath. Marcus didn't deny it. He smiled. He said his uncle taught him things, old things. That cemeteries weren't just for the dead, they were thresholds. That trust made openings. That betrayal made offerings stronger. That's when the bell rang again, closer this time. We didn't argue. We ran. Gravel tore at our shoes, branches clawed our faces. I don't remember unlocking the gate. I just remember being on the other side, gasping, the iron bars slamming shut behind us on their own. The police didn't take us seriously. They said it was a prank, teenage drama. They searched the cemetery and found nothing. No notebook, no photos, no Marcus. His car was still there. He wasn't. Elise stopped talking to anyone. Jonah moved out of state. I dropped the class. A week ago, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was my missing battery, still warm, and taped to it was a note, written in familiar handwriting. Not everything buried stays dead. People always get weird when I talk about my family's cemetery tradition. So I'll say this up front. We weren't reckless, and we weren't stupid. It sounds bad when you explain it wrong, and everyone explains it wrong. We grew up next to the cemetery. It was our backyard in every sense that mattered. We knew its paths better than the streets in town, and we treated it with more respect than most people treat the living. That's why it bothers me so much when strangers assume the danger came from us. My family has watched over Hawthorne Rest Cemetery for 3 generations. Not officially, not anymore, but my grandfather was a groundskeeper, and before him his father was the night watch. Even after the town hired a private company, we stayed involved. We locked gates when they forgot. We reported vandalism. We cleaned fallen stones after storms. So when people hear that we used to play Grave Run as kids, they picture something cruel or careless. It wasn't. Grave Run was structured, controlled, it had rules. Every autumn, just after the first frost, our extended family would gather after sunset. No outsiders, ever. That rule mattered more than any other. We brought proper equipment, LED headlamps with red light mode to preserve night vision, handheld radios set to a single channel, backup flashlights with fresh batteries, whistles for emergency signals. Everyone wore boots, gloves, long sleeves. No drinking, no dares, no wandering off. The goal was simple. One person, the runner, had to make it from the south gate to the old family mausoleum on the north ridge without being tagged. The rest of us were watchers. We spread out along pre-agreed paths and crossings. No hiding inside crypts. No touching headstones. No shortcuts through unmarked graves. If you broke a rule, the run ended. It sounds childish, I know. But it wasn't about fear. It was about familiarity, about knowing the cemetery so well that the dark didn't change it. My first time as runner, I was 17. I remember how confident everyone was. My uncles joked quietly. My cousins checked their radios like pros. My aunt tightened my headlamp strap and reminded me to stay on gravel whenever possible. I felt proud more than scared, like I was being trusted with something important. The whistle blew once. That meant start. I jogged at first, conserving energy, counting steps the way my grandfather taught me. Gravel path to dirt, dirt to stone, left at the cedar tree with the split trunk. I could hear my own breathing, the soft click of radio chatter in my ear. Watchers weren't allowed to chase aggressively, only intercept. A hand on the shoulder, a whispered, "Got you," and the run was over. For the first few minutes, everything felt exactly the way it always had. Then I heard footsteps that didn't follow the pattern. They were too slow, too heavy. Watchers moved carefully, quietly. These steps dragged, uneven, like someone favoring one leg. I stopped behind a tall obelisk, killed my lamp, and listened. The footsteps passed without a radio call. That should have been impossible. I told myself it was an echo. Sound travels strangely among stone and trees. I started moving again, faster now, heart picking up pace. When I crossed the old drainage ditch, my radio crackled.
"Did you see that?"
My cousin Leah asked. I whispered back, asking where she was. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice sounded tight. Someone just crossed between markers 12 and 13. That made no sense. Marker 12 was a child's grave with no path behind it. Marker 13 backed up to a wall of thorn bushes no one could move through quietly. I asked if she'd tagged them. "No," she said. "They didn't look like, never mind." I kept running. The cemetery felt different then. Not unfamiliar, but crowded somehow. The air was colder, heavier, pressing against my ears. I heard breathing that wasn't mine. I told myself it was panic. That adrenaline plays tricks. A shadow moved ahead of me, crossing the path without sound. I called out the signal phrase, our way of confirming identity in the dark. No response. I switched my lamp to white light and swept the beam across the headstones. Someone was standing between them. At first, I thought it was my Uncle Mark. The height was close, the posture almost right. But the longer I looked, the more wrong it felt. His shoulders were slumped too far forward. His arms hung too long. When he turned his head toward me, the movement lagged like it took effort. That's when I realized the threat wasn't from trusted people. I backed away slowly, radio pressed to my mouth, whispering for a stop signal. Static answered me. The figure took a step forward. Gravel crunched under its foot, too loud, too deliberate. I ran. I broke rules then. I admit it. I cut across grass. I vaulted a low fence. I didn't care about tagging anymore. I just wanted the north ridge in sight. Behind me, the footsteps followed, faster now, breathy and wet, like lungs full of soil. I tripped near the angel statue with the missing face. My knee slammed into stone, pain flaring white hot. Hands brushed my ankle, not grabbing, just grazing, and I screamed. Lights flared all at once. Voices shouted. The footsteps stopped. My family surrounded me, radios blaring, flashlights sweeping the darkness. They asked what happened. They checked me for injuries. They argued about who'd been out of position. No one admitted to chasing me like that. They searched the paths, the thorn bushes, the wall. They found nothing. We ended Grave Run that night. Packed up early. Locked the gates ourselves. No one said much afterward. Not that night. Not ever. We stopped the tradition quietly, without discussion, like we all agreed something had been crossed. A few days later, my aunt found something at the south gate. A whistle. One of ours. Same model. Same serial batch. Bent slightly, like it had been chewed. Hanging from the iron bars was a message scratched into the rust with a sharp object. "RE80DUURE?" I took the job because rent was due, my credit card was maxed out, and I was tired of being the friend who always said no when everyone else said yes. That's the honest version. The less honest version is that I wanted to prove I could handle something unusual without flinching. The opportunity came through a campus bulletin board. Actual cork and pushpins, not online. Overnight grounds assistance needed. Historic cemetery property. Temporary housing provided. The pay was better than anything else I'd seen that month, and it promised hands-on experience for students interested in history, preservation, or archival work. I wasn't any of those things, but desperation has a way of broadening your interests. I told my girlfriend at the time, Mara, about it over cheap takeout. She frowned immediately, stirring her noodles like she was buying time. A cemetery, she said, overnight. It's supervised. I lied. Group job. Short term. Easy money. She asked why it paid so well. I joked that dead people don't complain. She didn't laugh. In the end, it wasn't just me. 3 others from campus replied to the posting. Alex, who needed internship credit, Renee, who was trying to get away from her parents for the summer, and Will, who pretended he wasn't scared of anything and overcompensated constantly. None of us knew each other well, but we bonded fast over shared financial panic. Planning was rushed. The contact, Mr. Calder, emailed us directions but no address, just GPS coordinates and instructions not to arrive after dark. He emphasized respect for the grounds and warned us not to wander beyond marked paths. When someone asked about cell service, he replied, "Unreliable. Consider that a blessing." The cemetery was hours away, far from any town I recognized. The road narrowed the farther we drove, pavement giving way to gravel, gravel to dirt. Trees closed in until the sky was a thin gray ribbon overhead. When we finally reached the iron gates, they were already open. The place was enormous. Older than anything I'd ever seen. Headstones crowded together like teeth, some sinking into the earth, others propped up by rusted braces. Mausoleums dotted the hills, their doors sealed with heavy stone slabs etched with names that meant nothing to us. Mr. Calder met us near a small maintenance building that doubled as our lodging. He was polite but distant, speaking carefully, like every sentence had been rehearsed. He gave us keys, a printed list of tasks, and a strict schedule. Daylight hours only, no exceptions. The first day passed quietly. We cleared debris, cataloged damaged stones, logged maintenance notes. The cemetery was peaceful in the sun, birds nesting in carved angels, wind whispering through tall grass. It almost felt wrong to be uneasy. Almost. Tension started with small things. Will kept wandering off despite the rules. Renee complained about the silence, said it felt thick. Alex tried to keep things professional but snapped whenever someone joked about ghosts. Mara texted constantly, asking if I was okay, and I started lying again, telling her it was boring. That night, isolation set in. The maintenance building was farther from the main road than I'd realized. No lights beyond our own. No sound except wind and the occasional creak of old stone cooling. I woke just after midnight to a faint glow outside the window. At first, I thought it was moonlight. Then it moved. A soft, bluish light drifted between headstones, slow and deliberate, stopping, then starting again. Renee saw it too. We stood at the window, holding our breath, watching it fade behind a mausoleum. We didn't mention it the next morning. No one wanted to be the first to say it out loud. The next night we heard singing. Low, wordless, carried on the wind like someone humming to themselves. Will laughed nervously and said it was probably locals messing with us. Alex shut the windows. I noticed scratches on the outside of the door that hadn't been there before. By the third night, something slammed into the side of the building hard enough to shake the walls. We rushed outside with flashlights, hearts pounding, only to find fresh footprints in the dirt. bare feet, leading away toward the older section of graves. That's when we found the message. It was carved into the wood of the supply shed, letters deep and jagged. Like whoever did it wasn't worried about splinters. YURENTHEW GPAC, a panic finally broke through the social pressure holding us together. Renee wanted to leave immediately. Will argued it was vandalism. Alex called Mr. Calder, who answered on the third ring, and told us calmly to stay inside and lock the doors. No explanation. No reassurance. The next morning, several headstones near our building were shattered. Not toppled, broken clean through. Tools were missing. Our car tires were slashed. Authorities arrived hours later. Too late. They took statements, photos, notes. They didn't seem surprised. Mr. Calder spoke to them privately out of earshot. When they left, they told us the job was terminated effective immediately. As we packed, I asked Mr. Calder what that place really was. He looked past me, toward the far hills, where the oldest graves sat unmarked. "This cemetery doesn't appear on most maps," he said. "That's intentional." Then he locked the gate behind us and refused to answer any more questions. To this day, when I search the coordinates he gave us, nothing comes up. Just forest, and sometimes very late at night. My phone lights up with a missed call from a number that doesn't exist. I inherited the cemetery because no one else wanted it. That sounds dramatic, but that's the plain truth. When my great-aunt Lillian died, the house went to my cousin. The money went to various relatives who argued over it for months. And the cemetery, 3 acres of old family plots on a wooded hill outside town, was left to me by default. Not because I was closest to her, but because I was the only one who didn't immediately say no. I should have known better. Aunt Lillian never married. Never had children. She lived alone in a narrow house that smelled like dust and pressed flowers, and every single Sunday, she walked up the hill to the cemetery no matter the weather. We joked about it when I was younger, said she was checking on her future neighbors. She'd smile thinly and tell us family takes care of its own. The signs were all there. The cemetery wasn't public. It was old land passed down through generations, with headstones dating back to the 1800s. Names repeated over and over. My name, my father's, his father's. People who died young. People who died strangely. It never occurred to me that inheritance could mean more than property taxes and overgrown grass. The first time I went up there alone was a week after the funeral. I brought gloves, trash bags, a notebook. Practical things. I told myself I'd clean it up, maybe hire someone later, maybe even sell the land. The gate creaked when I opened it, metal shrieking like it hadn't been moved in a long time. The headstones felt too close together. Some were cracked, others tilted, but all of them were clean. Not just free of debris, cleaned. Recently, I remember touching one and feeling faint warmth in the stone, even though the day was cold. I told myself it was sunlight. I found Aunt Lillian's shed near the back of the property, half hidden by trees. Inside were tools neatly hung, shelves of ledgers, jars of dirt labeled with dates and names. Some names were crossed out, some weren't. I laughed nervously and told myself it was a hobby. A strange one, sure, but grief makes people odd. That night, I heard footsteps outside my apartment. Slow, measured, like someone pacing back and forth, deciding whether to knock. I froze on the couch, heart hammering, staring at the door until the sound stopped. When I finally checked, there was nothing there. I slept badly after that. Dreams of dirt under my nails, of whispering voices I couldn't understand. Over the next few weeks, things began to happen. Small things. Dismissible things. Lights flickering when I passed mirrors. The smell of damp earth in rooms that had never known soil. Dirt appearing in my shoes, my bed, my pockets. I should have known better, I went back to the shed and started reading the ledgers. They weren't financial records. They were logs, burials, dates that didn't match death certificates. Notes in the margins. Restless. Settled. Requires attention. There were symbols drawn beside certain names. Protective markings, I later learned. Others were circled in red. My name appeared once. The research started innocently enough. Local archives, old town records, church registries. That's when I learned the truth about Aunt Lillian. She hadn't just maintained the cemetery. She'd been responsible for it. Bound to it. My family had served as caretakers for something the town quietly forgot. The land wasn't just burial ground. It was containment. The signs were all there. I found newspaper clippings about grave disturbances that stopped abruptly decades ago. About disappearances that ended after private interventions. About my ancestors being thanked but never named. The manifestations escalated after that. Shadows standing where no one was. Hands pressing from beneath the soil when I walked the paths. Voices calling my name in my own voice. I stopped inviting people over after my friend asked why someone was standing behind me in the kitchen window. There was no one there. I tried to sell the property. No buyers. No listings. It didn't show up properly on zoning maps. I tried to walk away, stopped visiting for weeks. That's when the knocking started. Every night. 3 slow knocks. Always at 3:17 a.m. If only I had listened. The final ledger was hidden beneath the shed floorboards. It explained everything. The cemetery wasn't passive. It needed tending, rituals, offerings, attention. If neglected, what was buried there remembered how to rise. And when a caretaker died, responsibility passed to the next of blood. Me. I tried to stop it. I followed the instructions. Lit candles, repaired markers, spoke names aloud. For a while, things calmed. The knocking stopped. The dirt stayed where it belonged. But some things can't be undone. I missed one name, just one. A headstone too worn to read. A grave too shallow. I didn't know it mattered. Now the footsteps follow me everywhere. Not just at night. Not just near the cemetery. I feel the weight of the land in my chest, pulling, claiming. I can't leave town without becoming violently ill. I can't sleep anywhere but my own bed. The cemetery calls to me when storms roll in. I still go every Sunday. Not because I want to. Because if I don't, something else will come looking for me. I took the job because I was out of options, not because I believed a word of the listing. That's important to understand. People always ask why I didn't see it coming, why I didn't question it harder. I did question it. I just didn't have the luxury of walking away. My savings were gone, my student loans were in deferment purgatory, and my landlord had already slid a final notice under my door with the kind of politeness that means eviction is already scheduled. The posting was vague on purpose. Night operations assistant, historic cemetery. No company name, no website, just a phone number and a promise of immediate start and above market pay. When I called, a woman with a calm, professional voice asked if I was comfortable working overnight, following strict procedures and signing a non-disclosure agreement. I said yes before she finished the sentence. I should have walked away. My first day started at dusk. The cemetery sat just outside the city limits, pressed up against a stretch of undeveloped land that smelled like wet earth and rot. The main office was a converted caretaker's house with fluorescent lights that buzzed too loudly and furniture that looked salvaged from closed-down hospitals. There were 6 of us on shift. A supervisor named Elaine who spoke like HR training videos. 2 guys who'd clearly been there a while and didn't bother learning my name. And another new hire, Jonah, who kept cracking jokes that didn't land. Everyone looked tired in a way sleep didn't fix. Training was procedural. Checklists, logs, timestamps. We were told to treat it like any other facility's job. Grounds checks, gate inspections, monitoring older sections for disturbances. Elaine emphasized accuracy. "If it happens, it gets logged," she said. "If it doesn't get logged, it didn't happen." That sentence stuck with me. The strange protocols started immediately. Certain paths were off limits after midnight. Some mausoleums were restricted entirely. If we heard voices, we were told not to respond. If we saw lights where there shouldn't be any, we were to mark the time and continue our route unless instructed otherwise. I asked why. Elaine smiled without warmth. "You're not paid to know why." Coworker warnings came quietly. One of the older guys, Mitch, leaned close while pretending to show me how to log a patrol. "Don't volunteer for extra rounds," he muttered. "And don't open anything that isn't already open." I asked what he meant. He just shook his head. People quit often, I learned, or they stopped showing up. HR called it turnover. The rest of us called it thinning. Jonah lasted 3 nights before his badge was found snapped in half near the south fence. Elaine said he'd violated protocol and forfeited his final paycheck. That's when the money stopped feeling real. The truth came on my 4th shift. I was assigned to shadow Elaine during a containment check in the oldest section of the cemetery, where headstones had sunk so deep they looked like they were being swallowed. We stopped in front of a mausoleum I hadn't seen on any map. It was open. Inside, the air was wrong, heavy. Breathing felt like work. There were marks on the walls, scratches, deep and frantic. Elaine handed me a clipboard and told me to record timestamps while she performed maintenance. I watched her kneel, whisper words that didn't sound like any language I knew, and hammer iron nails into the stone floor around a cracked sarcophagus. Something inside it moved. I should have walked away. They made it clear that quitting wasn't an option. The contract I'd signed included penalties that would have ruined me financially, but that wasn't the real threat. Elaine told me, calmly, that once you see certain things, the cemetery doesn't forget you. That leaving without clearance created liability. The money wasn't worth it. I stayed 2 more weeks. Long enough to see shadows crawl against gravity. Long enough to hear my name spoken from behind sealed doors. Long enough to realize we weren't maintaining the cemetery. We were keeping it from spreading. I escaped only because Mitch didn't make it back from a solo round. The chaos that followed gave me an opening. I ran. I didn't clock out. I didn't look back. I don't work nights anymore. I don't work near cemeteries. I don't stay in jobs long. Every employer asks why my resume has gaps I can't explain. Sometimes, during interviews, I feel dirt under my nails that isn't there. Sometimes I swear I hear Elaine's voice reminding me to log what happens. And I never forget that somewhere, my name is probably still on a clipboard, marked as unresolved. I inherited the cemetery the same way people inherit old debt. Quietly, awkwardly, and with a sense that someone else should have been responsible instead. My grandfather Elias died in late October, the kind of death that doesn't make headlines or inspire speeches. He simply didn't wake up one morning. No illness anyone could name. No warning signs that stood out until it was too late. At the reading of the will, the lawyer cleared his throat twice before telling me that the southern hillside property had been left entirely to me. Not the house, not the savings, the cemetery. I remember laughing, actually laughing, because I thought it was a mistake. My mother went pale. My aunt wouldn't meet my eyes. That should have been the moment I asked questions. I didn't. I should have known better. The cemetery had always been part of our family story, but never the main chapter. It sat behind our ancestral farmhouse, separated by a rusted iron gate and a line of cedar trees that never seemed to lose their needles. As kids, we weren't forbidden from going there, but we weren't encouraged either. Its working ground, My grandfather used to say, not a playground. I thought he meant respect for the dead. The first week after the funeral, I went through his belongings to look for paperwork, deeds, tax records, anything that explained why the land was suddenly my problem. His office smelled like old books and pipe smoke, the desk drawers organized with a care that felt obsessive in hindsight. Under neatly stacked ledgers and envelopes, I found items that didn't fit. Small cloth bundles tied with twine, iron nails wrapped in red thread, glass jars filled with soil, each labeled with a name and a date. Some dates matched headstones I recognized, others didn't. The signs were all there. I told myself it was superstition, rural traditions, old men clinging to rituals because it made them feel useful. I boxed everything up and set it aside, more focused on the practical nightmare of owning land I didn't want and couldn't sell. That night, I dreamed of the gate opening on its own. The first manifestation was easy to dismiss, a knock at the door just after midnight. When I checked, no one was there. The second was the smell, wet earth drifting through my apartment even though the windows were closed, and it hadn't rained. The third was harder to ignore, dirt beneath my fingernails when I woke up, packed deep like I'd been digging. I laughed it off with friends. Stress dreams. Grief does weird things. Everyone says that. But the cemetery started showing up in my waking life too. Headstones in the corners of my vision. The sound of iron scraping stone when I was alone. My grandfather's voice, just on the edge of hearing, saying my name the way he did when he wanted my attention. I went back to the farmhouse to get answers. In the attic, beneath warped floorboards, I found the journals, decades worth. Leather-bound, brittle pages filled edge to edge with careful handwriting. Not memoirs, records. Entries detailing disturbances, settling procedures, and names crossed out only after multiple confirmations. That's when I realized my grandfather hadn't been a caretaker in the sentimental sense. He had been a warden. The research phase consumed me. I stopped answering messages. I spent days in local archives, scanning microfilm and church records. I learned that my family name appeared repeatedly in town histories, always attached to phrases like volunteer service and private stewardship. I learned that periods unexplained violence or disappearance always ended shortly after one of my relatives took over cemetery duties. The signs were all there. What I'd inherited wasn't land, it was responsibility. The activity escalated once I understood that. Objects moved on their own. Doors opened to rooms I hadn't entered. Footsteps circled my bed at night, slow and patient. When I returned to the cemetery, the headstones had shifted subtly, like they were leaning toward me. I tried ignoring it. That didn't work. I tried selling the land. No buyers. The listing vanished every time it went up. Surveyors refused to return my calls. One man quit halfway through an assessment, hands shaking, saying the ground remembered him. Desperate solutions followed. I burned the journals. I threw the jars of soil into the river. I locked the gate and swore I'd never go back. That's when the knocking began. 3 knocks, every night, always at the same time. If only I had listened. I found the final journal tucked inside the grandfather clock, hidden behind the weights. It explained what couldn't be destroyed. The dead there weren't resting. They were held. Bound by ritual, attention, and bloodline obligation. Neglect weakened the barrier. Destruction enraged what lay beneath. And responsibility, once accepted, couldn't be refused. I tried to pass it on. I begged my mother, my cousins, anyone. Every conversation ended the same way: confusion, anger, denial. They didn't feel it the way I did. The pull, the pressure, because it had chosen me. Now I live closer to the cemetery than I ever wanted. I tend it weekly. I repair stones. I speak names aloud the way the journals instruct. It keeps things quiet, mostly. but I can't leave town for more than a day without becoming violently ill. I can't sleep anywhere else. My dreams are full of open earth and hands reaching upward, waiting for permission. The gate opens for me now without a sound. Some inherit money, some inherit property. I inherited a boundary that cannot be abandoned. And one day, when I'm gone, it will be waiting to see who comes next. I said yes to the opportunity before I finished reading the email, which tells you everything you need to know about where my life was at the time. I was behind on rent, barely keeping my relationship together, and exhausted from explaining to friends why I still hadn't broken into anything resembling a real career. Everyone around me seemed to be moving forward, new jobs, engagements, apartments with actual space, while I was rationing groceries and pretending it didn't bother me. When the listing promised paid experience, housing included, and a short-term commitment, I didn't question the details the way I should have. The position was for a seasonal assistant at a privately owned cemetery, historic preservation, night documentation, grounds assessment. It wasn't glamorous, but it was relevant enough to my field that I could justify it to myself and to everyone else who expected progress from me. I told my girlfriend, Jenna, that it was good exposure. She asked why it was so far away and why the host insisted on in-person interviews only. I shrugged. Opportunities aren't convenient. She didn't argue, but she didn't look convinced either. There were 4 of us total. I found out through a group email after I accepted. Ben needed the credit hours. Marisol wanted the money, but mostly wanted to get out of her parents' house. Eric claimed he was into the aesthetic, which annoyed everyone immediately. None of us knew each other, but we bonded quickly over shared stress and the awkward pressure to seem capable. Planning was chaotic. The host, Mr. Klein, sent directions instead of an address. He emphasized that cell service was unreliable and encouraged us to download maps ahead of time. He was polite but brief, answering questions with partial information and signing emails with only his last name. We met in a grocery store parking lot 2 towns away and carpooled the rest of the way. The road narrowed fast, trees crowding in, sunlight thinning until it felt like dusk even though it was barely afternoon. No one said much after a while. Even Eric stopped joking. The cemetery appeared suddenly, iron gates already open, stone pillars leaning inward like they were tired. Beyond them stretched rolling hills dotted with headstones, mausoleums half swallowed by ivy, and paths that curved in ways that didn't seem accidental. My first thought was that it was beautiful. My second was that it felt watched. Mr. Klein met us near a small caretaker's lodge at the edge of the property. He was older than I expected, neatly dressed, polite in a distant way. He showed us our rooms, went over basic rules: no wandering at night, no entering sealed structures, no photography without permission, and handed us work schedules. Respect the grounds, he said, looking at each of us in turn. They've been here longer than any of us. The first day passed quietly. We cataloged markers, cleared debris, documented weather damage. The cemetery felt different up close, dense, layered, like too many stories pressed into one place. Sound didn't carry normally. Voices felt muffled even when we stood close together. Small tensions started early. Ben took everything too seriously. Eric ignored instructions. Marisol complained about the silence, said it made her skin crawl. I tried to mediate, worried about being seen as difficult. Social pressure has a way of making you tolerate discomfort longer than you should. That night, Jenna called and asked if I was okay. I told her I was tired. The first incident happened just after midnight. I woke to light moving across my wall, soft and blue, white, like a reflection from water. At first I thought it was a passing car, but the lodge sat too far from the road. The light drifted slowly, pausing. then sliding upward like it was floating. I heard Marisol whisper my name from the hallway. We stood at the window together, watching the glow weave between headstones. It didn't illuminate the ground so much as hover above it. When it disappeared behind a mausoleum, the darkness felt heavier than before. In the morning, no one wanted to bring it up. Ben said it was probably maintenance lighting. Eric joked about ghost tours. Mr. Klein listened without reacting, then told us not to work past sunset anymore. Building tension came from the little things. Tools left where no one remembered putting them. Paths that looked different on the return walk. The sense that the cemetery felt larger at night, like it stretched when no one was looking. We started snapping at each other. Eric accused Ben of hiding equipment. Marisol stopped sleeping. I caught myself rehearsing explanations in case I had to leave early and justify it to everyone back home. The second incident wasn't subtle. We heard singing, low off key, drifting through the trees after dark. It didn't sound recorded. It didn't sound human either. More like someone trying to remember how a melody went. When we told Mr. Klein, he closed the door to his office before answering. "Old acoustics," he said. "The land carries sound." That night, something hit the side of the lodge hard enough to shake the windows. We rushed outside with flashlights and found deep gouges in the wooden siding, like something had dragged itself along the wall. In the dirt below were impressions that didn't look like shoes or animal tracks. The message appeared the next morning. It was carved into the stone base of a nearby monument, letters jagged and uneven. That was when panic finally outweighed pride. Ben wanted to call the police. Marisol was crying, saying she felt sick. Eric went quiet for the first time since we arrived. Mr. Klein told us to stay inside and wait. Authorities arrived hours later. They took statements, photos, notes. They spoke to Mr. Klein privately, far enough away that we couldn't hear. When they left, they told us the position was terminated effective immediately and advised us not to return. As we packed, I asked Mr. Klein what that place really was. He hesitated, then said, "This cemetery exists outside standard records." He wouldn't elaborate. We drove away in silence. Weeks later, when I tried to explain the gap in my resume, I realized how impossible it sounded. When I searched for the location online, nothing came up. No listing. No history. No owner. Jenna asked why I still flinched at distant singing. I didn't have an answer. All I know is that somewhere, there's a place that doesn't want to be found. And someone who makes sure it stays that way. People hear about our cemetery nights and immediately decide we were irresponsible. I'm used to that reaction. It's easier to blame the people who stayed than to accept that sometimes the familiar turns on you without warning. So I'll say this clearly. The same way I always do, my family didn't treat the cemetery like a joke, and we didn't treat each other like fools. We'd lived beside Greenwood Hill Cemetery for 3 generations, not near it. In the casual sense, our property line literally touched the north fence. My great-grandmother was buried there, then my grandfather, then a string of relatives whose names repeated often enough that you stopped thinking about it. The cemetery was part of the rhythm of our lives. Sunday walks, fallen branches after storms, resetting small stones when frost heaved them out of place. So yes, we had a tradition. And no, it wasn't reckless. Every October, after the first hard cold snap, our family and a few close neighbors participated in what we called Boundary Watch. It started decades ago after vandalism incidents, long before motion sensors or cameras were affordable. The idea was simple: maintain presence. Make sure nothing crossed from the cemetery into the neighborhood, and nothing crossed in the opposite direction either. There were rules, always rules. We met at dusk. Everyone signed in on a clipboard. No alcohol, no outsiders, no improvising routes. Equipment was checked twice, headlamps with red light mode only, handheld radios on channel 3, spare batteries taped shut, whistles worn around the neck but never blown unless there was real danger. Boots with thick soles, gloves, reflective tape on the backs of jackets so we could identify each other from behind. No one went alone. Ever. I was 20 when I participated for the first time, old enough to join the patrol routes instead of staying near the gate. My father walked me through everything again, even though I'd watched it my entire life. He made me repeat the rules back to him. He made sure I knew the call and response phrases we used to confirm identity in low light. "You hear someone behind you," he said, tightening my radio strap. "You don't turn right away. You call it in. You wait for confirmation." I remember rolling my eyes, but I did it, because this wasn't a game. It was routine. The first hour felt exactly like it always had when I'd watched from the porch. Quiet, methodical, gravel crunching under boots, radios murmuring softly. I followed my assigned route along the east side, counting rows of headstones the way I'd been taught. The cemetery felt normal, cold, still, familiar. Then I heard movement that didn't match the pattern. It wasn't footsteps exactly, more like dragging, slow, uneven, stopping and starting without rhythm. I radioed it in, using the correct code, heart picking up speed despite myself. My aunt responded that she hadn't moved and neither had my cousin on the adjacent path. I told myself it was wind. Old branches scrape against stone all the time. Sound behaves strangely around monuments. Still, I adjusted my route to stay closer to my partner. "Mark." That's when I noticed the light. A headlamp beam flickered ahead of us, low to the ground and moving erratically. At first, relief washed through me. Someone else was out there. Familiar equipment. Familiar glow. Mark raised his radio and called the identification phrase. No response. The beam cut out abruptly, plunging that section of the cemetery into darkness thicker than it should have been. Mark muttered something under his breath and reached for his whistle, then stopped himself. No unnecessary signals. We advanced slowly, following procedure, sweeping our lights side to side. That's when I saw the figure standing between two headstones that I knew by heart. The shape was wrong. Too still, too narrow in the shoulders. The reflective tape was there, but placed too low, almost dragging along the ground. The headlamp wasn't strapped correctly. It hung at an angle, casting light upward instead of forward. Mark whispered, "That's not anyone on the list." That was the moment it clicked for me that the threat wasn't from trusted people. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, heavy and final. We backed away, calling it in, voices tight but controlled. Static crackled over the radio. The figure took a step forward, and the sound it made wasn't boots on gravel. It was wet, soft, like something pulling itself free. We ran, not blindly. Training kicked in even as panic surged. We stayed on marked paths, shouted position updates, avoided splitting up. Behind us, the dragging sound accelerated, turning into something like pursuit. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw the light again, swinging wildly now, attached to something that moved too low to the ground. Someone screamed over the radio. Someone blew a whistle. The cemetery erupted in motion and noise, beams of red light cutting through the dark, voices shouting commands that stopped making sense. Mark tripped, and I grabbed his jacket, hauling him upright just as something brushed past my leg. Not grabbed, not quite touched, just close enough to feel the air shift. We broke through the north fence line as a group, stumbling onto the grass beyond, collapsing into each other in a shaking mess of breath and adrenaline. My father slammed the gate shut and locked it with hands that trembled for the first time in my life. No one spoke for a long time. We accounted for everyone. All present, all shaken. No injuries beyond scrapes and bruises. When we finally looked back through the bars, the cemetery was empty, silent, exactly the way it had been at the start of the night. Boundary watch ended immediately and without debate. Equipment was collected. Radios powered down. No one argued. No one joked. In the days that followed, we tried to make sense of it. Rational explanations were offered and discarded. Trespassers didn't explain the movement. Animals didn't explain the light. Someone suggested a prank, then stopped talking when they realized how that sounded. A week later, my father found something at the east path where the incident started. One of our headlamps. Same model. Same serial number batch. The strap was torn clean through, as if cut rather than snapped. It was placed carefully on top of a headstone, centered like an offering. Scratched into the stone beneath it were words that hadn't been there before. Wyu wat ichid us. Nanabu ekayomwaduyu. The sign is still there. We don't do boundary watch anymore. But sometimes, late at night, I see a light moving between the graves, low and unsteady, following the fence line, as if checking to see whether anyone is watching back. I trusted Marcus more than anyone else at the time, which is probably why it took me so long to understand what was happening. We'd been friends since we were kids. Sleepovers, shared secrets, inside jokes that didn't make sense to anyone else. When he invited me to spend a weekend helping him catalog headstones at an old private cemetery outside town, I didn't hesitate. He framed it as a favor for his uncle, who managed the property, and a chance for us to get away from everything that had been weighing us down lately. I was exhausted, broke, and desperate for something that felt grounded. A quiet place. Fresh air. No expectations. The cemetery itself surprised me in a good way. It wasn't the neglected horror movie setting I'd imagined. The gates were clean, the paths well kept, the stones arranged in neat rows broken up by old trees and family plots. There was a caretaker's cottage near the entrance where we'd be staying. Small but comfortable, with working electricity and a wood stove that Marcus promised we wouldn't need. That first afternoon felt almost peaceful. Sunlight filtered through the branches, birds hopped between markers, and the air smelled like grass instead of decay. Marcus seemed relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in months. He joked, teased me about being jumpy, talked about maybe taking over his uncle's role someday. Looking back, though, I remember how often he watched me instead of the scenery. I'll skip the boring stuff, the hours of walking, the repetitive note, taking the way the day slipped by faster than expected. What matters is that by nightfall, I felt comfortable enough to stop paying attention, comfortable enough to leave my backpack unattended while I helped Marcus move some equipment into the shed. That was when my phone charger went missing. I noticed it later that night, when my battery dipped below 10% and I reached into the side pocket where I always kept it. Empty. I tore my bag apart, convinced I'd misplaced it. Marcus shrugged and said maybe I left it in the car. He offered to lend me his if it became an issue. It didn't feel important at the time. The second thing to disappear was my notebook, not the one we were using for work. The small black one I kept in my jacket, where I scribbled personal thoughts, ideas, things I didn't want anyone else reading. I realized it was gone when I went to right before bed. Panic flared hot and sudden. That notebook mattered to me. Marcus helped me look. We checked the cottage, the shed, even the paths we'd walked. He stayed calm, reassuring, told me stress made people forgetful. I wanted to believe him. That night, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside the cottage. Slow, careful, pausing near the windows. I told myself it was Marcus stepping out for air, or an animal, or nothing at all. I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening until the sound faded. The next morning I asked Marcus if he'd been outside. He said no, then added that his uncle sometimes did rounds at night. When I asked why his uncle hadn't introduced himself, Marcus laughed and said he was private. First red flags are easy to ignore because they're small. More things went missing after that. My spare shoelace, a pen from my pocket, one glove from a pair. Each loss was minor enough to explain away, but together they made me uneasy. Every time I brought it up, Marcus brushed it off. Told me the cemetery messed with people's heads. Told me to relax. Strange things started happening after dark. Sounds that didn't match the environment, metal scraping stone. A low humming that seemed to come from underground. Lights flickering in sections of the cemetery where there was no electricity. Marcus never seemed surprised. If anything, he looked irritated when I reacted. On the third night, I couldn't sleep at all. The air in the cottage felt heavy, pressing against my chest. I got up to get water and noticed the door to the shed was open. We'd locked it. I was sure of that. Inside, the shelves had been rearranged. Tools laid out in careful rows. On the worktable sat my notebook. My hands shook as I picked it up. The cover was smudged with dirt. Pages bent back as if someone had been flipping through them repeatedly. Then I saw the additions. New writing, not mine. Notes in Marcus's handwriting filled the margins. Observations about me, when I slept, what paths I favored, how quickly I noticed missing items, dates, times. Little check marks beside entries like charger, notebook, lace. That's when it hit me. This wasn't random. This wasn't stress. This was deliberate. Tucked into the back of the notebook were photos. Printed. Grainy. Me standing between headstones. Me asleep on the couch the first night. Me walking alone near the far plots, taken from behind. I heard the shed door close behind me. Marcus didn't pretend when I confronted him. He didn't raise his voice or deny anything. He told me his uncle believed certain places required trust to function properly. That cemeteries remembered betrayal better than kindness. That people who didn't notice what was taken from them made the best anchors. I don't remember everything, he said. I remember the way the ground seemed to vibrate under my feet. I remember running. An adult, his uncle, I assume, intercepted me near the gate. He didn't chase. He just watched, expression unreadable, while Marcus shouted that I was ruining things. I fumbled with the lock, hands slick with sweat, and somehow got it open. I didn't stop running until I hit the road. The police listened politely. They searched the property. Found nothing. No notebook, no photos. Marcus claimed I'd had a panic attack. His uncle backed him up. There was no proof left behind. I left town the next day. A week ago, a package arrived at my new apartment. No return address. Inside was my missing glove, and a printed photo of my front door taken from across the street. I don't answer unknown numbers anymore. But last night, my phone buzzed anyway. A single message. You still forget what's taken from you,